Karen cut my internet line. Didn't know it was a live feed to the Pentagon. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. The morning sun crept through the blinds, casting soft streaks of light across the cluttered desk. Emma, a freelance journalist, sat hunched over her laptop, fingers typing rapidly across the keys. She was used to the quiet hum of her suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where lawns were neatly trimmed, and the only sounds were birds chirping or the occasional dog barking in the distance. There was no rush, no hustle, just the simple rhythm of suburban life. Her work required focus, and Emma had learned long ago how essential her home office was to her productivity. With a steady stream of articles, blog posts, and research, she had carved out a modest career. The majority of her clients were digital, relying on quick responses, fast turnarounds, and constant online communication. As a journalist, the need for reliable internet was her lifeline, her connection to the world. Without it, her work would come to a halt. The silence in her small office would be deafening. She glanced at the clock on her desk. Just another ordinary morning. It was early enough that the rest of the neighborhood was still in bed, but not so late that her day would feel rushed. Emma sipped her coffee, tapping her fingers impatiently against the desk as her screen loaded slowly. It was a minor annoyance, a slight delay that came and went with the ebb and flow of Wi-Fi signals. But as the minutes passed, the slight delay turned into something else. The loading bar on her screen didn't budge. Her emails refused to send, and her articles stalled in the drafts folder, unable to sync with the server. She frowned, a creeping sense of dread settling in her stomach. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, but she didn't click yet. Emma knew that feeling too well, the sickening realization that something was off, something that could derail her entire day, or worse, her entire livelihood. Karen lived 2 houses down, right on the corner. To anyone else, she seemed like the model neighbor, always smiling, always waving, and quick to lend a hand whenever it was needed. Her bright floral dresses and perfectly curled hair made her look like she'd stepped out of a picture-perfect suburban dream, the kind you'd see on a real estate brochure. Her house, a cozy ranch style with a perfectly manicured lawn, was always spotless, and the scent of freshly baked cookies seemed to linger in the air every time Emma passed by. But there was something about Karen that never quite sat right with Emma. It wasn't anything overt, nothing she could pin down with certainty. It was more of a feeling, like a shadow in the corner of her eye, there one moment and gone the next. Karen had a way of inserting herself into everyone's business. It wasn't malicious per se. No, Karen wasn't the type to cause trouble on purpose. She simply couldn't resist the urge to help, even when no one had asked for it. One time, Emma had mentioned offhandedly that she was planning to repaint the front door. By the end of the week, Karen was at her doorstep with 3 different color swatches, insisting that the bright teal shade would really make the house pop. Emmy had never even mentioned needing help, but there Karen was, acting as though she was saving the day. And then there was the matter of her garden. Karen's backyard had more flowers than Emma could count, neatly arranged in rows with no space left untended. It was the sort of place that would make a florist weep with joy. And yet, whenever Emma was out in her own garden, Karen would stroll by with a watering can in hand, offering unsolicited advice on how to grow tomatoes, or which plants were best suited for the summer heat. Emma had never asked for tips, but Karen never hesitated to give them, as though it was her duty to oversee the neighborhood's upkeep. It wasn't just gardening or home improvements, though. No, Karen's reach extended to all corners of neighborhood life. If someone was having a barbecue, she'd somehow show up with a platter of potato salad, usually with a "you're welcome" smile that felt more like an order than a suggestion. If there was a minor issue with someone's car, she'd call a mechanic before they had even thought of looking under the hood. Emma wasn't the only one to notice. All the neighbors had stories. Some appreciated Karen's helpful ways, but others couldn't shake the feeling that she was always just a little too involved. Of course, no one ever dared to say anything to Karen directly. After all, she was harmless enough, wasn't she? She always had good intentions, or at least that's what she told herself. But Emma couldn't help but wonder. If Karen was always so eager to get involved in the smallest details of everyone's lives, What other things might she have been meddling with behind the scenes? It started as an ordinary morning. Emma stretched, yawning as she slowly pulled herself from the comfort of her bed. The early rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. She shuffled to the kitchen, put on the kettle for tea, and let the comforting sounds of her morning routine fill the air. It was a quiet day, just like every other. The kind of day that promised a few hours of uninterrupted work, a steady stream of writing, and maybe a few sips of coffee between paragraphs. She sat down at her desk, the familiar hum of her laptop welcoming her into the day. But today the hum didn't come. Instead, there was an annoying silence, a stillness that set her on edge. She moved the mouse, tapping the trackpad, but nothing happened. The screen remained frozen, the spinning wheel mocking her attempts to get things moving. She sighed and clicked a few more times. Still nothing. A sense of unease crept up her spine as she checked the Wi-Fi icon in the corner of her screen. No signal. That was odd. The connection had been fine last night, and she hadn't moved from her usual spot in the house. She clicked the icon again, hoping it was just a glitch, but the little symbol remained stubbornly blank. Okay, maybe it's just a hiccup, Emma muttered to herself, trying to remain calm. She opened the settings and clicked through the network options, troubleshooting with the patience of someone who had dealt with this kind of problem more times than she cared to admit. Restart the router, reset the modem, check for outages in the area. Nothing worked. She even tried rebooting her laptop in case that was the issue. After a few minutes of fruitless attempts, frustration began to mount. Emma wasn't a tech expert by any means, but she knew the basics. The connection was fine yesterday, and it was a direct line to the house. No reason it should be down now. She grabbed her phone and checked for any messages or notices from her internet provider. Nothing. No outages, no disruptions. The problem was on her end. She stood up from her desk, pacing the room for a moment. What could it be? She had checked everything, or so she thought. Her mind raced as she considered the options. Maybe it was a wiring issue. Maybe the router was just on its last legs. With a sigh, she stood up, grabbed her shoes, and headed outside to check the modem's connection in the utility box on the side of the house. It was an old setup, but it had worked fine until now. The utility box was tucked near the back of the house, partially hidden by a few bushes that had grown a little too thick over time. As she approached, she noticed something strange. The box, usually tightly sealed, was slightly ajar. She knelt down and carefully opened the latch, peering inside. At first, it seemed like everything was as it should be. Cables snaking through the small space, wires connected neatly. But then her eyes stopped on something that made her heart skip a beat. The main internet line, the thick cable that fed the house's connection, was frayed. It wasn't just loose, it was completely severed. The end of the cable dangled limp and useless, a few strands of wire exposed in the morning light. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She felt the air around her grow still, almost as though the world had paused in that one moment. This wasn't a technical glitch. This wasn't something she could fix with a few clicks or a restart. The physical line had been cut. Someone had intentionally disconnected her connection. Her mind raced as she stood there, staring at the severed cable. This was no accident. It was deliberate. But who would do something like this? And why? She glanced up, looking toward the quiet houses in the distance. The sound of a dog barking faintly in the background. But everything seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. Emma's mind raced as she walked across the lawn, her footsteps crunching on the dry grass. The severed cable still lay in the utility box, taunting her with its unanswered questions. There was only one person nearby who might have information, and she knew exactly where to go. Karen's house was just a few houses down, nestled behind a row of hedges that Emma had often admired for their perfect symmetry. As she reached the front door, she took a deep breath and knocked firmly, trying to shake off the unease creeping up her spine. Within seconds, Karen's face appeared at the window, her smile as bright and welcoming as ever. Emma had always been able to count on her neighbor for a chat, whether it was about the weather or the latest gardening tips. But today, Emma wasn't in the mood for small talk. Karen opened the door, her floral apron still on from what looked like a morning of yard work. "Oh, Emma, good morning. You're up early, aren't you?" she said with that same syrupy sweet tone she always used. Morning, Karen, Emma replied, trying to sound casual. Listen, I was wondering if you'd seen anything unusual around my house today. My internet's down, and I found the cable outside had been cut. Karen's smile faltered for just a second, but it was so brief that Emma almost missed it. She quickly recovered, though, her expression smooth and friendly. Cut? Oh, that's odd. I haven't noticed anything like that. She leaned against the doorframe, glancing over Emma's shoulder, as if the answer might be somewhere in the distance. But I did see a lot of activity around your yard this morning. Lots of things to tidy up, you know? The bushes could really use some trimming, and those vines near the fence, well, they're getting a bit out of hand. It's always nice to keep the place looking neat. Emma's eyebrows furrowed. You were outside my yard? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, I just thought I'd do a little tidying up, like I said. You know, no harm in giving the neighborhood a little spruce every now and then, Karen replied, her tone casual, as if she had just offered Emma a friendly gesture. Nothing more. She seemed almost too eager to explain herself. Emma studied her neighbor for a moment. Karen's face was painted with that wide, perfect smile, but there was something in her eyes, something that didn't quite match the cheerfulness in her voice. It was the subtle way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the slight twitch of her hand as it brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. She wasn't nervous exactly, but there was an odd tension in the air. I don't remember asking for any help with the yard, Karen, Emma said, her voice a little sharper now. And I don't remember seeing you outside when I left this morning. Oh, I must have just missed you, Karen said quickly, almost too quickly. She forced a small laugh, her eyes darting toward the street, as if the conversation might drift to something else. I was just trying to do a good deed, you know, always keeping an eye on things around here. Wouldn't want any of the neighbors to let their gardens get overgrown, especially not with all the rain we've had lately. Emma felt a chill in her stomach. She hadn't seen Karen in her yard earlier, and the way she'd phrased everything felt off, as if Karen was trying just a bit too hard to seem casual. She was offering help where it wasn't asked for, just like always. But this time, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Right, Emma said, her voice tight. Well, I'll keep that in mind, Karen. Thanks for the concern. Karen's smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something, maybe impatience, maybe guilt, that passed across her features before she quickly turned to step back inside. Of course, of course. You're welcome, Emma. Just doing my part to keep the neighborhood looking nice. Emma watched her retreat inside, the door clicking shut behind her. She stood there for a moment, staring at the house. It all seemed so normal, so neatly packaged. The kind of small-town charm that made you believe everything was fine. But Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was very wrong. Karen's strange behavior, the casualness with which she offered help, and the way she skirted around Emma's questions, none of it added up. Emma turned and walked back to her house, her thoughts swirling. There was something more to Karen's story. She wasn't just tidying up. Not this time. Later that afternoon, after her conversation with Karen had done little to settle her growing unease, Emma decided she couldn't just let this go. The more she thought about it, the stranger Karen's behavior seemed. The more she thought about the cut cable, the more it gnawed at her. She had to find out what really happened, or else she'd be left with unanswered questions. And the last thing she wanted was to sit idly by, hoping everything would just sort itself out. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way to the utility box again, her thoughts racing. It had been a few hours since she last checked, but something told her that she hadn't uncovered all there was to know. She knelt beside the box, inspecting it carefully, her fingers brushing against the frayed edge of the cable once more. This time she noticed something she hadn't before. The severed cable wasn't the only one there. She leaned in closer, shining the flashlight across the ground. There, partially hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves and branches, was another line. It was thinner, almost camouflaged against the dirt and debris. She followed it with her eyes, tracing the path as it snaked along the side of the house. It didn't stop at the utility box. No, it went further, disappearing beneath the thick bushes at the corner of her yard. And from there, it seemed to wind along the edge of the fence. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Someone had run an entirely separate line, an unauthorized line, connecting her house to something. But what? And why? She stood up, brushing dirt off her hands as her mind raced. There had to be an explanation, but none of it made sense. Whoever had done this had to have been here for a while, and they had to have known exactly what they were doing. Without thinking, she decided to follow the cable. She stepped carefully, avoiding the low-hanging branches as she moved along the edge of the fence. The line seemed to lead toward the street, and as she stepped closer to the curb, she froze. There, parked just a few houses down, was a van, unmarked, nondescript, and nearly blending into the scenery. At first, Emma thought nothing of it. After all, there were plenty of contractors and service workers in the neighborhood, and a van like that was hardly out of place. But as her eyes narrowed, she noticed something odd. The van wasn't just parked there. It was parked in a way that seemed deliberate, angled just so that it had a clear view of her house. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who might be inside. The van sat motionless, as though it were waiting, hiding in plain sight. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something deeply unsettling about the van. It wasn't just its proximity, it was the quiet stillness of it, like it was part of something bigger, something she wasn't meant to see. Emma's eyes traveled back down the line, now visible clearly in the daylight. It led directly to the side of the van, where the cable disappeared beneath it. Her breath caught in her throat as a realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The cable wasn't just a random connection, it was feeding into that van. Her mind raced and a chill swept over her. It wasn't just her internet connection that had been compromised. This was something else entirely, something illegal. The cable wasn't for someone casually using her Wi-Fi. No, this was a line that had been tapped into, repurposed for something far more sinister. The thought struck her cold. Surveillance. Unauthorized surveillance. The van was a monitoring station, parked just outside her house, drawing information, streaming data. Whatever it wasn't just innocent meddling. Whoever was behind it was watching, listening, or recording. They'd tapped her line, used her connection without her consent, and now it all made sense. The cut cable, Karen's strange behavior, the van, it all connected, like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was trying to solve. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who could be behind this? Was it someone in the neighborhood? Someone she'd never suspect? Had Karen known all along? She felt the weight of it all, the urgency to act, but also the fear of what she might uncover next. She glanced at the van once more. There was no telling who was inside or what they had been doing, but Emma knew one thing for sure. She was in way over her head. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just within reach, but every step she took seemed to unravel more questions. She couldn't leave it at the van. She had to know exactly what was going on. With a steady hand, she pulled out her phone and snapped a few quick photos of the cable running from her house to the van. She'd need evidence, something concrete if she were going to figure this out, or if anyone else ever needed to get involved. She decided to take a risk and went back inside to dig deeper. Sitting at her desk, Emma tried to piece together everything she had seen. The cable, the van, Karen's odd behavior. It was all leading her down a path she wasn't sure she wanted to follow. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't ignore the red flags. Something bigger was at play here. She started with the photos she'd taken, zooming in on the cable where it connected to the van. She could see a small, almost imperceptible black box attached to the line, like some sort of device. It didn't look like any tech she was familiar with, nothing like a router or modem. It looked more like a transmitter, maybe something designed to capture data. Her stomach tightened. She could only imagine what kind of information had been siphoning off through that line. Taking a deep breath, she decided to follow the trail back. She'd seen an address printed on a sticker on the side of the box, half hidden under some tape, like an afterthought. Emma typed it into her search bar, her fingers trembling slightly. The results didn't come up with a lot, but one entry stood out. It was an address, buried deep within the search results, that linked to a facility that immediately made her heart skip a beat. The Pentagon. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen. the words jumping out at her like a warning sign. The Pentagon. Number that couldn't be right. Her pulse quickened as she clicked through the search results. The address, along with a series of cryptic numbers and letters, pointed to a government facility in Arlington, Virginia. The Pentagon wasn't just a building. It was the hub of national security. Emma had seen enough movies to know that much. Her mind raced. She tried to steady her breathing as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The cable running from her house, the van, the device attached to the line. It wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't some amateur operation or a misguided attempt to steal Wi-Fi. No, someone had hijacked her connection and was using it to send data to the heart of the U.S. military's operations. 2. The Pentagon. It wasn't just her internet that had been compromised. It was something much more serious. Someone, somewhere, had been using her line to feed a live surveillance feed to one of the most secure facilities in the world. The implications were staggering. What kind of data had they been sending? Were they monitoring her? Were they watching the entire neighborhood? Or was this just a small piece of something much larger? Emma felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck as her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How many other unsuspecting people had been drawn into this web? She thought back to Karen's odd behavior, the way she'd always been helping everyone in the neighborhood. Was she part of it? Or was she another pawn in whatever operation was unfolding? The more Emma thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't something she could just ignore. This wasn't a neighborhood issue, a petty crime, or a simple mistake. She had uncovered something far darker, something that could spiral out of control if she didn't act. The fact that the feed was going to the Pentagon only added to the chilling reality. The government had access to whatever was being transmitted, and it wasn't just the technical side of things that was at risk. It was national security. Her hands shook as she sat back in her chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. She couldn't be the only one who had stumbled onto this, could she? It had to be bigger. Someone was orchestrating this, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But who? And why? She took a deep breath and glanced back at the photos she had taken earlier. The situation was spiraling faster than she could process. She knew she needed help, but she also knew that the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. This wasn't just an innocent mistake or a neighbor's weird hobby. This was espionage, and now she was tangled up in it. Emma rubbed her eyes, her mind still racing. The weight of the truth pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She had uncovered something much bigger than she had bargained for. And there was no turning back now. The more Emma dug into the mysterious connection between her house and the Pentagon, the more she realized how out of her depth she was. Her fingers trembled as she typed into the search engine, looking up more information about the address tied to the unmarked van and the cable running from her house. The deeper she went, the more layers of secrecy she uncovered, until she finally found herself staring at the words, "High Security Government Facility." Her heart skipped a beat when she read through the details. The Pentagon wasn't just a building, it was the nerve center of U.S. national security. It was a place where intelligence, military strategy, and defense operations were coordinated. A facility so secure, so vital to the country's defense, that the thought of her home somehow being involved in a live surveillance operation feeding directly into it made her stomach turn. The more Emma read, the clearer it became. The Pentagon housed countless departments dedicated to espionage, covert surveillance, and intelligence gathering. Every piece of information processed there had the potential to impact the nation's safety and security. It wasn't just a military headquarters. It was the heart of classified operations, where even the smallest piece of data could make or break international relations or national defense strategies. This was the place where decisions were made about wars, peace treaties, covert missions, and threats to national security. And now somehow, Emma had unwittingly become part of that operation. The cable running from her house, the unmarked van parked just down the street, and the strange device attached to the line weren't a random set of coincidences. She had been caught in the crosshairs of something massive, something that could shake the very foundation of national security. Panic began to rise within her as she pieced everything together. The feed from her internet line wasn't just transmitting innocuous data like browsing habits or personal files. No, this was more, much more. The implications of it all were too big to fully grasp. Someone had been using her connection to funnel live surveillance footage or data, potentially from her own house or the entire neighborhood, into the most secure, most secretive intelligence facility in the country. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this was. What if they had been watching her? What if they had been monitoring everyone around her? She thought back to Karen's strange behavior, her casual, almost rehearsed manner when she had been helping Emma with the yard. Could Karen have been more than just a meddling neighbor? Could she have been involved in the operation somehow? Or was she, too, unknowingly part of this vast network? But the most terrifying part was the realization that Emma had become a conduit for this operation. Her house, her life, had been tapped into, transformed into an inadvertent data stream feeding directly into a facility that dealt with matters of global importance. The thought of someone observing her life, her movements, possibly even her every conversation, filled her with dread. She felt like a piece on a chessboard, manipulated and controlled by forces she couldn't even begin to understand. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her chest. She felt trapped, caught between the walls of her own home and the outside world, which now seemed completely foreign and threatening. She had always considered herself just a regular freelance journalist, someone living a quiet life in a quiet neighborhood. But now everything had changed. She wasn't just a civilian anymore. She had become part of a web of surveillance and secrets that reached far beyond her understanding. The panic started to settle in, creeping up her spine as she realized the extent of the situation. It wasn't just her internet that had been compromised. It was her entire life. The cable in her yard, the van park nearby, and the mysterious feed to a high-security government facility weren't just coincidental. They were deliberate, coordinated, and part of something far larger than she could have ever imagined. Her thoughts spiraled. What was she supposed to do now? Who could she turn to for help without drawing even more attention to herself? If the government was involved, if they were already monitoring her, who could she trust? The more she thought about it, the more she felt the walls closing in. The only thing she knew for sure was that her life, her privacy, and her safety had been irreversibly altered, and she was now a player in a game that she hadn't even known existed. The realization hit hard and fast. This wasn't just an ordinary crime. It wasn't a simple hacking operation or an isolated incident. She had uncovered something that went all the way to the heart of national security, and she had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, or just how much danger she was truly in. Emma sat at her desk, her eyes glazed over as she stared at the screen in front of her. The weight of the discovery felt like a physical burden, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had uncovered something monumental, something that could rock the very foundations of national security. And now she was faced with a decision that would determine the course of her life. Should she report what she had found? Or should she stay silent, keep her head down, and pray that no one came knocking? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. The moral dilemma twisted inside her, pulling her in two different directions. On one hand, she knew that what she had discovered wasn't just a small, insignificant breach of privacy. This was a serious national security issue. Someone, whether it was a rogue element within the government or an outside entity, had been using her internet line to transmit surveillance data to a facility with access to some of the most sensitive information in the world. If this was allowed to go unchecked, who knew how many other people were unknowingly part of this operation? How many others were being watched? The implications were chilling, but on the other hand, the very idea of speaking up terrified her. If she reported it, if she went to the authorities, what would happen to her? Would the government even believe her? She wasn't a seasoned investigator or a whistleblower. She was just a freelance journalist working from home, trying to make a living. She knew how easily people like her could be silenced, discarded as irrelevant, or worse, labeled a threat. She could become a target, a pawn in a game far beyond her control. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Rachel, her closest friend since college. Rachel had always been the practical one, the voice of reason when Emma's emotions got the best of her. Maybe, just maybe, Rachel could help her make sense of this. Rachel. Hey, how's everything going? You still working on that project? Emma's fingers shook as she typed her reply, trying to keep the panic from leaking into her words. Emma. Rachel, I need to talk. Something's happened. I found something huge. Something dangerous. Can I call you? Rachel's response came almost immediately. Rachel. Of course. What's going on? Emma felt the familiar weight of anxiety settle in as she dialed Rachel's number, holding her breath as the phone rang. When Rachel picked up, her voice was calm, steady, like nothing was wrong in the world. Hey, Emma, what's up? Rachel asked. Rachel, I think I've stumbled onto something big. Something illegal. Something involving the government. Emma's voice wavered slightly. I've uncovered this surveillance operation. My internet connection was hijacked, and now it's feeding into a high-security government facility. I think they've been watching me, watching all of us. There was a pause on the other end. Whoa, that's a lot. Are you sure about all this? Rachel asked, her voice suddenly serious. I've double-checked everything. I've traced the line, and I know it's real. The Pentagon is getting data from my internet feed. This is not a mistake. It's deliberate. Rachel was quiet for a long time, and Emma could practically hear her thinking. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her tone thoughtful but cautious. You need to report this, Emma. This is huge. You can't just sit on it. If they've been monitoring you, who else are they watching? If this is really going to the Pentagon, it could be bigger than you realize. You have to tell someone, an authority you can trust. You have to stop this before it gets worse. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her, hearing Rachel's belief in what she had discovered. But then, almost immediately, doubt crept in. What if Rachel was wrong? What if reporting it put them both in danger? I don't know, Rachel. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just making things worse? If I report this, they might come after me. I could lose everything. My career, my safety. I'm just a journalist. I don't have the resources to take on something like this. Rachel's voice softened, but the urgency was still there. I get it. I really do. But you can't let fear stop you from doing what's right. If you're right about this, staying silent won't make it go away. It'll only make you a target, and maybe even more people will get caught in this mess. You have to take action. You have to report it. Emma pressed her hand to her forehead, the weight of the decision settling heavily in her mind. But as she looked around her apartment, her sanctuary, her quiet place, she realized that the world around her had already changed. The lines between safety and danger had already blurred. There was no going back now. She couldn't stay silent. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed again. It was an email from one of the cybersecurity experts she occasionally consulted for her freelance work. The subject line caught her attention. Urgent. Security alert. Surveillance networks detected. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message, only to find a cryptic response. We've been monitoring unusual traffic patterns in your area. If you are aware of any suspicious activity, do not engage directly. Contact the proper authorities, but tread carefully. Not all of them can be trusted. Her breath caught in her throat. The expert's words only deepened her confusion. She wasn't alone in this, but she wasn't sure who she could trust. Was the expert trying to help, or was he warning her about a trap? Was someone watching her right now? The conflicting advice from Rachel and the expert left Emma feeling more paralyzed than ever. She was caught between two worlds, one where doing the right thing meant risking everything, and another where silence might be her only form of protection. The dilemma twisted inside her, tightening its grip. No matter which path she chose, there was no way out without consequence. Emma sat in silence for what felt like hours, her phone still in her hand, but she hadn't touched it. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, each one pulling her in a different direction. The weight of the decision before her, reporting the surveillance operation or remaining silent, was suffocating. She stared at the screen of her phone, Rachel's words still echoing in her head. You have to do what's right. And yet, even as her gut told her that Rachel was right, the fear clawed at her. What would happen if she made the wrong move? What if her life was shattered in the process? What if the people involved in this operation had more control, more influence than she could ever understand? She didn't have the tools, the training, or the resources to navigate something so deep and dangerous. But then she remembered the email from the cybersecurity expert. His warning had been cryptic, but it was a reminder of how far-reaching this situation could be. She couldn't stay in the shadows forever. If she didn't take action now, the operation might spread further, affecting more people, and she might never get another chance to stop it. The fear that had kept her paralyzed slowly began to shift into resolve. Emma took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling over her like a heavy fog. Her fingers hovered over her phone again, and without thinking, she began typing. To whom it may concern. I have uncovered a serious security breach involving unauthorized surveillance activity. I believe the data being transmitted is going directly to a high-security government facility. The internet line in my home has been hijacked, and surveillance footage is being streamed. I have gathered evidence to support this claim and am prepared to share all details upon request. She stared at the message, the knot in her stomach tightening as her heart raced. It felt like an eternity before she hit send. But once the message was out of her hands, there was a brief moment of clarity, as if the weight of the decision had lifted, just a little. The anonymity of the tip provided a layer of safety. She could stay in the shadows while the authorities took it from there. But even as the email was sent, Emma couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had given up her safety for something much bigger than herself. The risks were undeniable. What if they traced her back to the tip? What if the authorities didn't take her seriously, or worse, if they were part of it all? Her mind raced, but she knew it was too late to turn back now. She needed to cover all her bases. She gathered the photos she'd taken of the severed cable in the unmarked van. She uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage system, setting up a private account with an encrypted password. If something happened to her, at least the evidence would be protected, out of her reach but still accessible to the right people. Emma carefully packaged all the digital evidence, ensuring that each file was labeled with the proper dates, times, and locations. She didn't just want to send raw data, she needed to be sure it would make sense to whoever received it. She included detailed notes explaining the process she had followed to trace the connection, the peculiarities of the van, and even Karen's involvement, though she wasn't sure how much weight her neighbor's behavior would carry in an investigation. When everything was prepared, Emma closed her laptop with a deep exhale. She wasn't sure if she had done enough or if this would even lead anywhere. But for the first time in days, she felt something like control. She had taken the first step. She had made a decision. The rest was up to the authorities now. But as the reality of the situation sank in, the fear crept back into her thoughts. What if this made her a target? What if the people behind the operation found out she was the one who had tipped off the authorities? She couldn't live in constant fear of retribution. She had to trust that by doing the right thing, she was protecting more than just herself. She was protecting her neighborhood, her friends, and even strangers who might unknowingly be caught in the same web of surveillance. She glanced at her phone again. No new messages, no new warnings. It was just her, alone in her apartment, waiting for something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But it was done. The decision had been made. Emma had chosen to act. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to push aside the fear and doubt. The truth was out there, and now it was in someone else's hands. Weeks passed, and the weight of the decision Emma had made seemed to follow her every step. The days after sending the anonymous tip felt like an eternity, each one dragging by with uncertainty and unease. Yet as time wore on, Emma began to hear whispers in the neighborhood. The authorities had launched an investigation into the suspicious activities she'd uncovered. The van had been traced, the cables had been confiscated, and agents had combed through every shred of evidence Emma had provided. Then a few days later, the first official statement came through the news. The operation she had inadvertently uncovered was far more complex than she could have ever imagined. What had started as a small-scale surveillance scheme was part of a much larger network involved in espionage. The agents investigating the case had dismantled a covert operation spanning multiple states, targeting both civilian and government networks. Data from unsuspecting civilians like Emma had been funneled to secure facilities, feeding a web of intelligence that reached far beyond local interests. It was then that Emma learned that Karen, her seemingly harmless neighbor, had been more than just a busybody. In fact, she was a key player in a larger network of individuals who had been using innocent people's homes as unwitting points of access for a massive data collection operation. Karen had played a critical role in orchestrating the installation of the surveillance equipment and ensuring the data feed ran smoothly without detection. Emma's neighborhood, once so quiet and peaceful, had been an unexpected hub for a nationwide spy network, and Karen was at the heart of it all. As the investigation continued, authorities uncovered a network of individuals, some of whom were tied to foreign entities seeking to undermine national security. Emma's discovery had been the spark that unraveled the entire operation. Without her tip, the surveillance would have continued unchecked, and more homes, more families, could have been unknowingly swept into the web of espionage. While the news was a relief, knowing that the operation had been stopped, Emma couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. Karen, whom she had always viewed as just a nosy neighbor, had been involved in something far more dangerous and far-reaching than Emma could have imagined. The realization hit hard, especially considering how close Emma had come to trusting Karen. She thought back to the times when Karen had helped her with small tasks around the yard or offered unsolicited advice. Each seemingly innocent gesture now took on a chilling new light. Sitting in her apartment one evening, Emma reflected on everything that had happened. Her heart still raced when she thought about the enormity of the operation she had uncovered. How something as simple as her internet connection had turned into a potential national security crisis. But she also felt a sense of pride. Her actions, however small they seemed, had made a difference. She had stood up when it felt like everything around her was pulling her back into silence. Her decision to report the surveillance operation had brought down a network that had likely been in operation for years, affecting countless innocent people along the way. Emma realized that it wasn't just about stopping one operation, it was about vigilance, about being aware of the world around her, even in the most seemingly mundane moments. She had always thought of herself as an ordinary person, living an ordinary life. But in truth, everything could change in an instant. Her community, her neighborhood, even her own life could be altered by forces she couldn't see. The line between security and danger was thin, and it often took someone from the outside, someone paying attention, to notice when that line had been crossed. She thought back to the first time she had noticed the van outside her house, the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach when she saw the cable snaking through her yard. That had been the moment everything shifted. If she had ignored it, dismissed it as a coincidence, things could have played out very differently. Instead, she had trusted her instincts, trusted that something was wrong, and had acted on it. The truth was, no one could afford to be complacent, not when so much could happen behind closed doors, under the cover of everyday life. Emma had learned the hard way that vigilance wasn't just a matter of protecting your home, it was about protecting your community, your country, your way of life. And sometimes that vigilance meant standing up, even when you didn't fully understand the danger you were facing. As she looked out the window, watching the quiet suburban street below, Emma knew she would never see her neighborhood the same way again. It wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a reminder that the world could be both more dangerous and more connected than she'd ever realized. And that was a lesson she would carry with her, no matter what came next.